pictures of him. This is the same person that raided the home of my personal political assistant, expecting to get me there. They thought that is where I was hiding. They didn't get me, and they abducted the wife of my personal assistant, held her in the military barracks for 37 days. In those 37 days, so much nasty things happened to her, but among which she told us that they even removed her contraception, the IUD, from her. Now these and many other abuses are done especially to women. Knowing that was the case, I knew what would befall me if I fell in their hands. That's how I ended up here. Now many people, especially back home, especially those that are in support of the regime but are trading under a Pan-African banner, were criticizing me of ending up in America and not in another African country like Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and all these others. But we all know that is a Besigye, who was the main opposition leader for so many years before I showed up. He was abducted in Kenya by Ugandan security, driven across the border in a car truck, and right now he's in prison in Uganda, having been presented in a kangaroo military court. Many other citizens have been abducted either from Tanzania or from Kenya and other countries. That is how I ended up here. I'm not here to seek pity. I'm here to seek solidarity with Africans and citizens of the world, because I know that time immemorial, the liberation of places has been successful with the help of their diasporas. That's why I'm here. I could go on and on and on, but I hope that's introductory enough.
Thank you for that. All right, so let's stick with the theme of the military for now. And when people think of elections, you have to really put it in the context of Uganda. Describe what is referred to even by national media as the election in Uganda, when in fact when you're campaigning, there were certain places you could not have access because, and we want you to stream live. You were blocked by the military, you were blocked by the police, there were no-go zones declared for you, and your convoy was being fired on with live bullets, and some of your aides were actually struck with live bullets. And yet, people still showed up to the campaign rallies. Could you try to explain that? Why are people willing to take that risk to come to your campaign rallies, even though they know that there's a very high likelihood of violence being led out by the armed forces and the police?
Thank you. What keeps bringing the people to listen to the message of change is hope. It is only hope, the stubborn hope that drives the people. What keeps us going is the desire to keep that hope alive. We've said it many times that Uganda is the second youngest country in the world. We are young, we are broke, we are hungry and angry. We could pick guns and remove that government, that oppressive regime. But we know history has shown us that violence has not produced peace, it produces more violence. And we also know that it's painful, but non-violence is stronger than violence. That's why we stuck to non-violence. So we went into this campaign like we did the other time, well knowing the kind of regime that we were facing, but it was the only window for us to connect with the people, to interact with the people, and to awaken and arouse them, and we achieved that. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the next questions is the role of outside countries. And the question is, how do international actors, whether it's governments, China, or multilateral institutions, and of course that includes the World Bank and IMF, how do they shape the political outcomes in Uganda? And how should African leaders navigate these influences while maintaining sovereignty? Well, in the case of Uganda, it's a bit different because he's maintained his sovereignty for the last 40 years now. So if you talk about that in Uganda's case, but generally in African countries as well.
completely different meaning back home. Just like elections, just like democracy. I mean, these are words that are used and thrown around whenever desired by the authoritarian leaders back home. In the context of Uganda, much as we got independence 63 years ago in 1962, I don't look at us as the citizens independent. The regime in Uganda for over a decade has been receiving up to $1 billion every year from the United States, let alone what comes from Europe and other countries. But this has been a transaction not between the people of Uganda and the development partners, but between General Museveni and the development partners. It's unfortunate, and this we've been reiterating it, that we are oppressed not because we are weak as the people of Uganda. Africans are oppressed by dictators not because they're weak, but because those dictators have a wind in their wing, and that wind are the so-called development partners. Allow me to call them oppression partners. Why? Because these are democracies, and if they wanted us to have democracy, we won't get it. I'll take you a little bit back. Idi Amin was supported by the British until they had had enough of him and others. The apartheid regime was supported by the West until they had had enough of him. I am very sure that if America or Europe did not agree with the oppression of the people of Uganda, they would stop it by disassociating with it. The regime in Uganda and many other authoritarian regimes in Africa have their bloodline, have their support, have their survival tied to the developed world. While elections are being rigged, all we get are statements and not action. On 18th and 19th November 2020, hundreds of people were massacred on the street in Uganda. Yes, we got some statements of condemnation, but we did not see any sanctions being slapped on those people that killed Ugandans in cold blood, and that continues again and again and again. So, yeah, the dictators are there, but they get their survival from the foreign partners. Today, Museveni is in business with China, and because of that, the biggest survival source, which is Lake Naroba, they call it Lake Victoria, is out of balance for the local fishing communities. Why? Because the Chinese are using it. The foreigners, for as long as they are white or have white skins in Uganda, are much more regarded than the citizens. It can go on and on and on and on. Much of the reason why we come to the developed world is to call them out. We know that apartheid thrived until a documentary was shown here in America against apartheid, and until there were widespread protests of Africans and friends of Africa condemning apartheid, that apartheid was defeated and brought down. So we come here not because people back home are not church. When you look at the campaign, the masses, young, old, male, female, educated, uneducated, rural, urban, all turned up to show their desire for change. But the dictator was able to subdue them by killing them, by abducting them, by raping women and men to cow them down. And yes, that succeeds because the Western world closes their eyes. That's why we come to spaces like this, well knowing that a student of Howard University might be a singular student, but you agree with me that you, especially who come from Africa, are so followed and so honored and so respected. To raise this voice, maybe this voice will be echoed by you and get our friends, the American population, and those that you can reach out to ensure that they are provoked, at least their conscience is provoked to change the narrative back home. Thank you.
Sorry, galvanize the youth in Uganda. Uganda is one of the youngest countries in the world. 80% of the population is under the age of 35. But before you respond to that question, and the importance of the youth movement in Africa, we've seen some changes in countries like Senegal. You feel what the youth have been able to do by coming out to the streets. So I want you to press that, but before that, I want to turn on to what you said in your last remark in terms of how the global community was galvanized to fight apartheid in South Africa. And I've always thought about this. Do you think it was much easier to get a global movement against apartheid than to try to galvanize a global movement to go after an African government which may actually have repressive policies that are comparable to the apartheid regime? Maybe you could speak on that and then segue to the youth.
Thank you. Why was it easier to get the global movement against apartheid up and running than now? I wouldn't be very quick to say it was easier because Mandela was in prison for 27 years. And even before then, there was oppression. In fact, I believe it took longer. Why? Because the oppressors there, mainly because they were white. But again, I'll tell you that the challenge that I see is that back home we seem to be quick to condemn an oppression by foreigners and to close an eye to oppression by our own kith and kin. Oppression is wrong, whether by white people or by